Hello, my name is Richard Spaide, and I'd like to present central serous chorioretinopathy and circumscribed choroidal hemangiomas, a strange intersection. These are my disclosures. These are my co-authors. Central serous chorioretinopathy is a localized detachment of the retina caused by leaks from the level of retinal pigment epithelium. It's more common in males. Indocyanine green angiography shows hyperpermeability, dilated blood vessels, and the appearance of venous congestion. OCT shows subretinal and sub-RP fluid, a thickened choroid, and dilated vessels in the choroid. More recently, we found that intervortex venous anastomosis occur in central serous chorioretinopathy, and this is an important finding because it has many implications. The interesting thing about vortex venous drainage of the choroid is that the choroidal vortex vein systems are independent of each other. Ordinarily, there's no connection between them. There's a watershed zone in between. I've shown the vertical watershed zone with a white dashed line, the horizontal with the yellow dashed line. Here are some other eyes to show normal venous drainage from the choroid. Here's an eye with central serous chorioretinopathy. Note that there's large vessels that communicate between each of the vortex vein systems. I've outlined some of them in yellow to help show them. It's possible that what people were talking about pachyvessels were actually these sort of anastomotic vessels. It's hard to know because the definitions used for pachyvessels were not so obvious or were quite variable from one paper to another. A common element to many of these diseases is that there appears to be an elevation in the venous pressure in the choroid. This could happen because of internal aspects of the eye or for external reasons to the eye. It causes dilation and congestion of the veins, overloading of the capillaries inside the choroid, and leakage and damage to the chorea capillaris. This is called venous overload choroidopathy. Circumscribed choroidal hemangiomas are orange-red tumors. They are localized massive blood vessels. They're a solitary finding, meaning that there's just one per eye. So it's obvious there's no connection between these two diseases since they're so different, right? Maybe not. We looked at 31 fellow eyes of patients with circumscribed choroidal hemangiomas. Note that there were 23 males and 8 females. And this is true for every study reported of circumscribed choroidal hemangiomas. They're much more likely in males than females. We got an age and sex matched control group, and we measured the subfoveal choroidal thickness. You can see that here's the two groups between the control group and the hemangioma group. They're matched for age. We matched them for sex as well. You can see 74%, and remember that number, 74% of people in the hemangioma group are males. They were matched otherwise except for hypertension. Interestingly, the hemangioma group had about twice as much hypertension as did the control group. To refresh your memory, I did a case control study with Michael Tittle a long time ago, and we looked at 230 patients and 230 controls. Interestingly, 73% were male. And we found that patients with central serous chorioretinopathy were twice as likely to have hypertension than the control group. Let's look at fellow eyes of circumscribed choroidal hemangioma. Their mean subfoveal choroidal thickness was more than 100 microns greater than in the control group, and this was highly statistically significant. The mean subfoveal choroidal thickness in the fellow eyes actually is quite similar to what we see in central serous chorioretinopathy patients. Here's a box plot showing the difference in the choroidal thickness between the control eyes and the eyes with choroidal hemangiomas. We plotted the thickness of the choroid in the hemangioma patients versus their age. Ordinarily, there's a strong correlation between the two. in that as people get older, their choroid gets thinner. However, in choroidal hemangioma patients, this was not the case. Interestingly, the other disease that shows no correlation between choroidal thickness and age is central serous chorioretinopathy. Here's a patient with a choroidal hemangioma, and let's look for features of venous overload choroidopathy. The tumor is shown in a light blue color. The green color shows large draining vessels from this tumefaction. But note that there's an array of interconnected blood vessels that help drain the blood from the tumor, not just to the local vortex vein system, but to every vortex vein system in this eye. Here's another patient with a choroidal hemangioma. Note that this patient has many intervortex venous anastomosis, and this patient also shows late hyperpermeability in regions outside of where the tumor is. Here's the fellow eye of a patient with a choroidal hemangioma. Note there's many intervortex venous anastomosis, particularly between the infratemporal vortex vein system and the supranasal vortex vein system. This patient also shows choroidal vascular hyperpermeability along that track. Here's a choroidal hemangioma patient. Notice the enormous number of intervortex venous anastomoses. It's hard to see the spaces in between the blood vessels around the nerve because there's so many of these anastomoses. This patient showed widespread hyperpermeability of these vessels. Here's the fellow eye of that same patient, and again, many intervortex venous anastomoses. And this patient also showed hyperpermeability in the fellow eye. So there does seem to be something unusual here. There does seem to be an intersection between central serous chorioretinopathy and circumscribed choroidal hemangiomas. Eyes with circumscribed choroidal hemangiomas have elements of venous overload choroidopathy in that they have the anastomoses between the vortex veins, dilated blood vessels, they look congested, may be driven by the hyperdynamic flow in the hemangioma itself, and they also can show hyperpermeability. The strange thing is that their uninvolved eye, the fellow eye, also seems to have many of these same kinds of features in which they have intervortex venous anastomosis and areas of hyperpermeability. Circumscribed choroidal hemangiomas are rare tumors. We are currently working on a paper. If you have any cases that you'd like to share and be part of this paper, let me know. My email is rickspaide@gmail.com. Thank you for your attention.